The morning the tow truck showed up, half the neighborhood came outside to watch. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to, because everyone knew this wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about months of pressure, warnings, fines, and a quiet power struggle that had slowly turned one peaceful street into a battlefield. The HOA thought they had finally won. Papers were signed, notices were posted, and they believed the homeowner had run out of options. But what nobody realized, not the board, not the neighbors, not even the person blocking the driveway, was that a single overlooked detail was about to flip the entire situation upside down. And by the end of that day, the same people who tried to force someone out of their home would be watching their authority collapse in real time. The question wasn't whether the fight was over. The question was who had really been losing all along. Before everything unraveled, life in the neighborhood had been simple and predictable. The streets were clean, lined with identical mailboxes and carefully trimmed lawns. Evenings were quiet except for sprinklers clicking on and distant conversations drifting across driveways. It was the kind of community marketed as peaceful, orderly, and safe, the kind of place where rules were supposed to protect harmony rather than create conflict. The homeowner had chosen the neighborhood for exactly that reason. After years of saving and planning, the house represented stability. Mornings followed a comfortable rhythm. Coffee on the porch, a short walk through the neighborhood, familiar nods exchanged with neighbors heading to work. Nothing felt unusual. The HOA existed mostly in the background. Occasional newsletters, reminders about landscaping, notices about seasonal decorations. It seemed structured but harmless. Among the residents was a neighbor known for constant involvement in community matters. She attended every HOA meeting, monitored small details others ignored, and treated neighborhood rules as personal responsibilities. At first, her presence felt reassuring. Someone cared about maintaining standards. Someone ensured things stayed orderly. But slowly, small interactions began to change tone. A note appeared about trash bins being visible too long after pickup day. Then another reminder about parking alignment. Minor issues that felt unnecessary but manageable. The homeowner adjusted without complaint, assuming cooperation kept peace. Yet each compliance seemed to invite another observation, another correction, another reminder that someone was always watching. The first real tension arrived quietly, a complaint about driveway use. It seemed absurd at first, framed as a technical violation tied to parking regulations buried deep within HOA guidelines. The homeowner reread the documents repeatedly, struggling to understand how normal daily behavior could suddenly be considered non-compliant. Still, the notices continued. What had once felt like a friendly neighborhood now carried an undercurrent of scrutiny. Walks felt shorter. Conversations felt cautious. And somewhere beneath the surface, a realization began forming. This wasn't random enforcement. Someone was paying very close attention. Then one morning, everything escalated. The neighbor parked her car directly across the edge of the driveway, partially blocking access. At first it looked temporary, maybe a mistake. But hours passed. The obstruction remained. Attempts to resolve the issue quietly went nowhere. Instead, an HOA notice arrived shortly afterward citing violations connected to vehicle positioning and property access. The situation no longer felt coincidental. Over the following weeks, enforcement intensified. Letters arrived with increasingly formal language. Each notice referenced specific clauses, deadlines, and potential penalties. Fines began accumulating faster than expected, transforming minor disputes into financial pressure. Every attempt to clarify the situation met procedural responses rather than solutions. The homeowner documented everything: photos, timestamps, copies of communications, unsure whether it would matter, but unwilling to remain defenseless. Stress crept into everyday routines. Checking the mailbox became an anxious ritual. Even returning home felt tense, wondering what new accusation might appear next. Neighbors noticed but stayed distant. HOA conflict had a reputation for becoming messy, and most residents preferred avoiding involvement. Silence allowed the situation to grow unchecked. Then came the escalation no one anticipated. A formal notice warned that continued violations could lead to enforcement actions affecting property standing. The language felt intentionally intimidating. Suddenly, the dispute threatened more than inconvenience. It threatened security itself. Instead of backing down, the homeowner began researching HOA procedures, discovering inconsistencies between enforcement actions and governing documents. Certain steps require verification that never occurred. Appeals processes existed, but had been quietly bypassed. Patterns emerged, suggesting enforcement wasn't as neutral as it appeared. Armed with documentation, the homeowner requested a hearing. The meeting atmosphere felt heavy from the start. Board members sat behind tables stacked with papers, projecting authority through procedure. The neighbor appeared confident, certain the process would reinforce her complaints. Evidence was presented methodically, timelines, photographs, inconsistencies in enforcement records. For the first time, uncertainty crossed the board's expressions. Questions arose that hadn't been anticipated. Why were similar situations elsewhere ignored? Why were violations issued without independent verification? Why had appeal steps been skipped? The narrative began shifting. Instead of backing down, the homeowner began researching HOA procedures, discovering inconsistencies between enforcement actions and governing documents. Certain steps require verification that never occurred. Appeals processes existed, but had been quietly bypassed. Patterns emerged, suggesting enforcement wasn't as neutral as it appeared. Armed with documentation, the homeowner requested a hearing. The meeting atmosphere felt heavy from the start. Board members sat behind tables stacked with papers, projecting authority through procedure. The neighbor appeared confident, certain the process would reinforce her complaints. Evidence was presented methodically, timelines, photographs, inconsistencies in enforcement records. For the first time, uncertainty crossed the board's expressions. Questions arose that hadn't been anticipated. Why were similar situations elsewhere ignored? Why were violations issued without independent verification? Why had appeal steps been skipped? The narrative began shifting. But the true turning point came unexpectedly. During the review, financial enforcement records revealed something overlooked. The neighbor's own property carried unresolved compliance issues previously ignored. Documentation showed selective enforcement patterns that exposed the HOA to serious legal risk. The room changed instantly. Confidence drained from the board as realization set in. What they assumed was routine enforcement now appeared dangerously inconsistent. Continuing the action could trigger broader legal scrutiny affecting the entire association. The homeowner didn't need confrontation or anger. The evidence spoke clearly enough. Within days, enforcement actions were suspended pending policy review. The tow order was canceled. Fees froze, and the authority that once felt immovable suddenly looked fragile. The neighborhood buzzed with quiet conversations. Residents began comparing experiences, discovering similar warnings and unexplained penalties. What once seemed isolated became collective. A community meeting followed, packed beyond capacity. Independent review findings confirmed procedural failures and selective enforcement risks. Residents demanded transparency. Board members struggled to justify past decisions. Reforms began soon after. Outstanding fines were reviewed and many dismissed. Enforcement procedures required verification and transparency. Anonymous complaints lost influence. Mediation replaced immediate penalties. Elections introduced new leadership focused on communication rather than control. The neighbor withdrew from HOA involvement, her influence fading as quickly as it had risen. For the homeowner, the aftermath felt surreal. Weeks passed without notices or warnings. Ordinary routines returned slowly, parking freely, walking without tension, enjoying evenings without feeling monitored. The house felt like home again rather than contested territory. Unexpectedly, the neighborhood improved. Conversations replaced complaints. Residents resolved issues directly instead of escalating them through enforcement. Property values rose as transparency restored confidence among buyers. Time revealed the deeper lesson. Rules themselves were never the enemy. Power without accountability was. The conflict showed how easily systems drift when authority goes unquestioned, and how quickly balance returns when someone challenges unfairness with patience and evidence instead of anger. Months later, the driveway looked exactly the same, yet it symbolized something entirely different. Not conflict, but resilience. Not victory over neighbors, but restoration of fairness. The HOA still existed, but it operated differently now, watched by informed residents who understood their rights as clearly as their responsibilities. And the greatest outcome wasn't revenge or humiliation. It was a community that learned silence allows problems to grow, while courage, even quiet, methodical courage, can reshape an entire neighborhood. Because sometimes standing your ground doesn't just protect your home. Sometimes it reminds everyone else that they were never powerless to begin with.